This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, we have got a terrific guest this week, and usually I do with all the stuff up front of the show. I'm not doing that this week. This is someone I've been looking forward to speaking with for a long time. Let's not waste any time and get right to it. Warren Weeks sold his first newspaper to his grandmother at the age of 5. He was Wayne Gretzky's PR handler for a day in 1988, and over the past 2 decades has become one of Canada's most popular and trusted media trainers. He's the founder of 11 Strategic Communications Incorporated, a full-service corporate communications firm that is called upon by thousands of spokespeople from a wide range of industries who want to take greater control over their media interviews and improve their media relations outcomes. This is going to be one of those take notes, takeaways episodes, guys. Warren, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Jody, thanks very much for having me here, and thanks for the kind words. It's very nice to hear.
Oh, absolutely. I like I said in the pre-show, I've been a great admirer of yours online for a while. I think what you do is tremendous, and I think it's incredibly important. Not just in the business that we operate in, public relations and the news business and everything, but I think in business in general. And so I want to open it up by asking you, what makes a great media interview, or maybe what makes a great conversation in general?
I could talk about this for 9 hours, which is probably the problem. So I guess it depends. Who are you, right? Are you the reporter? Are you the audience? Or are you the person giving the interview? And I think a lot of times people will get in their little silo. So typically a corporate spokesperson will use the opportunity to just read talking points, key messages, high level, kind of boilerplate BS kind of messages, very self-serving. And then they wonder why the interview is not going very well or why the quotes didn't get picked up. The journalist is looking for something completely different, and the audience just wants to be informed or engaged and maybe entertained. And so I think the people who do it well triangulate all of those things. They realize, look, this is not an advertisement. We're not here to just blow smoke up our own behinds. We're here to inform our audience, and we need to do it in a way that's going to make the reporter happy. So, and what I mean by that is giving me anecdotes, analogies, 12-second stories, not just you're rambling on for 2 and 3 and 6 minutes. So the people who do it well kind of please everybody. Their organization, of course, but the audience has to be first, and you have to do it in a way that the journalist enjoys. So to me, that would be the shortest answer I can give to that.
That is a concise answer. Absolutely. And I'll pick one thing out of there as saying that I am guilty of having told clients, and even gotten into arguments sometimes about, we have just as much interest in representing or helping the reporter or the media outlet as we do the client. Yes, we represent the client. We want to make sure that their story gets told, but we want to tell it in a way that's, as you said, attractive to the media outlet, the reporter, the editor, because if not, they're not going to run the thing, or they're not going to want you as the guest. If you're just reciting, as you said, talking points, that's useless to their audience, right?
I tell people that and I used to work as a journalist, and I have a sister who's a journalist with a national newspaper here. And I don't know if this is universal for everyone who's worked in journalism, but to me, there were only 2 modes that I had when I was listening to someone when I was doing an interview. And it was either they're talking, right? Blah, 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 blah. And they would be either no, like just like static. I can't use this. Of course, you let them talk, and they think the interview's going well, and you're taking notes. And every now and then there would be a yes. Okay, that's it. And you circle it in your notes, or you put a little check mark beside it, or you timestamp it on the recording. And I think in most cases with people who don't really understand what an interview is, they get it kind of backwards, right? So the stuff they think is most important to me sounds like the white noise. And it's those little phrases that they'll give, or a little anecdote that they'll throw in. That's the most interesting piece. And again, that's not the right way to do it. So I tell people, you have to first of all understand that that's how a journalist hears the interview. They hear it, they're looking for that soundbite, they're looking for that story. And yes, of course, it's concise and succinct, and that's not really how people talk, but that's just how the medium works. So understanding what the reporter's constraints and desires are take your most important content for your audience and you have to shape it like that so that the reporter, it's irresistible to them. And so it sounds easy. It's actually very difficult to do. And especially when the interview is live. But that to me is one of the secrets to a great media interview, is figuring out who the audience is, being empathetic with them. What is it that they want to know? How can I package that in a way that's going to serve our interests, but also be irresistible to the journalist? If you can do that, you have a superpower.
All right. So let's segue now into your business, right? And let's talk about what you do and how you help train people. Let's put the shameless plug out there for what you do. You run around the country in Canada. Do you operate in the US as well?
I've been in the States, been in the UK. I've trained people from Australia. So I wouldn't say I'm global, but I've tested the waters in other markets. But it's
well, like that's more global than some people who claim they're global. So we're going to say global. But you go out and visit, and I know on your website, terrific video, you describe how you pivoted during COVID, and we can get into that. But you help people develop their message and tell their story to and through media. Give people a little flavor as to how you help people do that. Sort of what are the pieces that you put in place, or what's maybe the conversation that you have, the instruction you give when you media train someone?
So when I first got into the corporate communications business, I was asked one day, I was working for a small family-owned PR firm, and I had just come out of the world of journalism, and they asked me to sit in on a media training session. And I had no idea what this was. The whole PR world I had no idea it existed. And when I did, I found myself like Dorothy in the land of Oz. This is amazing. So they asked me to be the journalist for the pretend interview with the spokespeople. And something on that day, I think this is in like 1998, and something on that day just lit something in my mind. I'm like, this is my thing. This is what I want to do with the rest of my career. And, between then and now, it's been almost a quarter of a century. And so it's been a lot of work and slogging to try to build that. Because, in the early days when I started my business, nobody wanted to work with me. And that's a whole other story. But typically, most of what I do these days is some version of media training. And the first thing I have to do when I get into the boardroom is overcome the stereotype of what most people, like the layperson, most people in most organizations, when they hear media training, the first thing they think of is politicians, people lying, not answering the question, dodging, bridging, all those stereotypical things. And
tricks, right? Like tricks and things.
Yeah. There's kind of like an ick factor around it, like the used car salesman and the politician, that kind of thing. And so part of my struggle that I find, struggle is probably not the right word, but part of my challenge is to reverse some of that. And I say right out of the gate, I'm not here to teach you how to talk like a politician. I'm not here to teach you to not answer the question. What we want to do is we want to do it in a timely, transparent, truthful way, but we want to do it on your terms. And we want to do it in a way that, and I don't even call them traps, because I really believe that most journalists are not out to get you. That's a common narrative out there today. And especially, on the tails of Donald Trump, and the media is the enemy of the people, and all this really, and a lot of that stuff is bleeding up in Canada. We have reporters getting assaulted and getting spit on and stuff like that. And so understanding how all those elements work and how to tell your story in a way that you're not going to fall into some of these, I'll call them pitfalls, right? And some of them are as basic as the awkward pause. So you're in the middle of an interview, not to get too tactical, but you're in the middle of an interview. The reporter asks you a question, you answer it. And then there's a little bit of a pause before their next. Now they could be typing, they could be writing, right? Like if it's a print interview and you're on the phone with someone, there's no urgency for you to jump in. And a lot of people, when they hear that 2-second pause, they start freaking out, their heart starts beating, they start sweating, and they fill it with just some nonsense, right? And many reporters will say that's some of the best stuff they get. And so again, there's an onus on us to write better content.
That is actually, speaking of tricks, I'm sorry to jump in here, but actually that's a report. I mean, I used to be a reporter too. That is actually a trick.
Well,
the reporter will actually stop and like let that silence hang there, because a lot of people will take the bait. And as you say, that's where the best stuff comes from.
But they will only typically do it if the interview sucks, right? If you're getting great stuff from them, there's no desire for you to do that.
You don't need, right.
So no, sometimes if you're getting just those we're leveraging the synergies of the financial industry with a robust track record, like if you're getting a message like that, inserting a pause is a great way to reboot the person's brain without them knowing it, and then they might give you something better. But that's one example. The granddaddy of mistakes that I tell people, and if anyone's listening to this, and if you're going to be doing a media interview, resist the very common urge to repeat the reporter's words in your answers. So reporters can ask questions in any way.
Accepting the premise of the question.
Yeah, even just the literal words, right? And so the premise is like kind of 4D chess. But I can ask someone, and there's a great example of this from a couple of years ago with Rob Manfred, the head of Major League Baseball. In the summer of 2020, there was a positive test on one of the teams, and the guy from ESPN has him in there. And he says, positive test on one of the teams. Is this your worst nightmare? And here you have this guy who's gray-haired executive, not his first rodeo. He makes $11 million a year, probably media trained up the wazoo, and he repeated the word nightmare twice. He did it in like, it's a double negative, right? I wouldn't say it's a nightmare. I wouldn't put this in the nightmare category. And a lot of people would say, like, what's the big deal? He's just being real and he's just talking. He's just being a guy. What happens is that quote jumps out at everybody who's in the journalism world, and it gets clipped and it gets put into the print stories. And so you can look again, March 2020, Google it. Hundreds of stories that were seen by millions of eyeballs, like TMZ, CBS, ESPN, Yahoo News, NBC, New York Times, like just every single outlet. And the word nightmare is in every single headline. And we like to think how smart and sophisticated and savvy we are as people, but that reptile part of our brain sees that word nightmare, even though he's refuting it's not a nightmare. You just see the word nightmare and all the negative connotations. And so that is the number one most common mistake that people make, is they will repeat the reporter's negative words. And that quote is then taken at the expense of one of your better quotes. So it is the most common and the most damaging thing people do in their media interviews.
So how can people, let's run right at it, right? So you're going to go into an interview, and let's set aside like the sandbag, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the spontaneous interview where you get caught walking out of the building, which 99% of people are never going to run into.
That's right.
How can people effectively prepare for an interview? What do you need to do?
Okay. If you have an immediate interview coming up, first of all, you have to put it in a category. Is it positive or is it negative? Is this a new milestone? Is it a reporter looking for information? You're a subject matter expert. I would consider all those kind of in the positive realm. Or has something gone wrong? And so I would say there's slightly different approaches based upon those. My first piece of advice is always work with your media relations team. Anyone who's in the communications world was probably breathing a sigh of relief. Don't go all Roy Rogers and just start doing interviews. Always go through your media relations team if you have one, or your communications folks. They are your best friend. They are your bulletproof vest. They're your life raft in rough seas, and lean on them heavily for messaging and for practice. But really, if you don't have one of those teams, you have to figure out, again, what's the core of the story? Who is my audience? It's not just the general public. Like based on what for example, like in Canada here, they just announced that one of the COVID vaccines has been approved for parents of kids 5 years old and younger. Now, if I'm going to be doing an interview on that story, that's my audience. It's parents of kids 5 years old and under. It's not just the general public. And when you have a really pinpointed idea of your audience, then your messages, I find, they resonate more, they pop more. They're just because you know who you're talking to, as opposed to trying to make everybody happy. And of course, you're going to have secondary and tertiary audiences, but it's that first one, figuring out who my audience is. And then it's like, how do I tell this story? And you have to resist the urge I talked about earlier, which is just kind of patting yourself on the back, like how great we are. We started our firm in 2003. We're doing some really innovative, like who gives a shit? No, can I say that on here?
Yeah, of course you can. We are four-letter word friendly.
Excellent. So I swear like a soldier when the mic is off. So, or is it a sailor? I forget anyway, I swear.
They all swear. We all swear. Don't worry about it.
The communicators are some of the worst at it. So figure out what your content's going to be. And there's no magic number 2, 3, 4, 6 messages. I like people to try to role play the interview. Imagine you had no horse in this race. What would you want to know if you remember the public? That's a great place to start. And of course, start who, what, where, when, why, and how. You can go through all those. Ask what people are going to figure out what people are going to ask about. If it's a contentious issue or a crisis, you have to ask yourself. I always use the term the elephant in the room. I find that and we had a great example of this in Canada last week with Rogers Communications. There's always a core element that the audience wants to know about, that the reporter wants to know about, but the executive doesn't want to talk about. And they naively think, if I don't prepare for it and if I don't bring it up, they won't ask me about it. And of course, again, and this is in actual smart people, well-paid people think like this. And you have to go there in advance and come up with all those mic drop, argument closing, amazing quotes ahead of time. Stories, analogies, anecdotes, statistics, trends, call to action. 95% of the work of a media interview is done before the reporter says hello. That is where your successful media interviews. It's all the prep, it's the practice. I encourage people to do a practice interview in-house with someone like us. Go through a 5 or 6 minute interview, get some constructive feedback, and then go do your interview, because your first one is always going to be your worst one. Why wouldn't it be, right? The first time you go golfing is probably your worst golf outing. So do one in-house, get some feedback, make some adjustments, and then go do your interview.
Do you think that executives or people in leadership positions, or even just subject matter experts, should they always be prepared? Should they always be taking batting practice on a regular basis, or just when they're getting ready?
You mean for the practice interviews themselves?
Yeah, just for the practice. Like, should you once a month kind of sit down with your communications people and drill on something?
Realistically, I'd love to say yes, but realistically, no one has time for that. And so if you have a contentious issue, if you're concerned about it, if it's important to the company, I would say that a practice interview is probably a good idea. If you're talking to a trade magazine about, something that's going on in your industry, again, not to belittle trade. I love trades. They're an amazing place to do some branding work for your organization, to get your legs under you for media relations. But they'll often give you your quotes back, and you can correct them and send them back and forth by email. Like, so there's different rules. Realistically, I know people are busy. My common rule though is you should never do an interview without any prep at all. So and I see this with the more senior, often the more likely they are to do this. Look, I've been in this business 22 years. What am I going to learn in the next 10 minutes? Put them through. They kick their feet up on their desk, looking out the window, and they're just making stuff up. So no matter how senior you are, no matter what your salary is, you always should do some prep, even if it's taking a pen and a legal pad and thinking through the process of the interview for 10 minutes. It's respectful to the audience, and it's respectful to you. Like, not to put any more pressure on this, but these interviews are out there on the internet forever. Like, your great grandchildren are going to be Googling your stuff and looking at it. And what are they going to be thinking? And so it doesn't take a lot of time. And I know a lot of people, they feel like I'm a natural at this. I hear this all the time too. He or she, they give a great presentation. She's great with a crowd. It's not the same thing. Like, if you give a great speech at a wedding, it's not the great same thing as doing an interview with the local newspaper. And so there's overlap, certainly, but I always believe that you have to do, like, for example, if there's anybody in this country, I'm talking about Canada again, who should be able to do a spontaneous improvised media interview, should be me. And I will never do that in my life, right? I've been in thousands of interactions as the journalist, as the media trainer, as the spokesperson. And I got a request to do one last year with a radio station in Montreal about, I think it was the Harry and Meghan thing, when they talked to Oprah and they wanted to these ridiculous stories. I practiced 45 minutes for that. Now, could I have done it? Just call me up and make it up? Of course. But the risk reward continuum doesn't justify that. And so I spent 45 minutes Googling, searching, getting facts, watching clips from the interview to have an informed conversation with this guy. I always use a legal pad. I have one with me right now. It's super old school, but I think it's one of the best media relations tools. Everything you need for your interview, you should be able to fit on one page. And then the magic is delivering it as if it's just spontaneous. Make it sound like you're not reading off a page, right? And so I would say to anybody, and these interviews are on my website. If you go to About Me in the Media, you can look them both up. They're on CJAD AM in Montreal. And there's 2 interviews. They're about 8 or 9 minutes long each. And I would hope that people would think it sounds like 2 guys just riffing, kind of what we're doing here, right? It's just spontaneous. It's just coming out. But I'm literally referring to a page. And I had all this stuff written down. And I had maybe I'll say this funny thing, or maybe I'll use that statistic. I had a lot of stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor. That's good. You want to have that. What you don't want to have is they ask you a question, which is like getting punched in the side of the head and you don't have an answer for, or you make up something that doesn't really pass the test.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the couple things that I repeat to clients all the time is, one, every interview is an opportunity. Whether they're coming at you positively or negatively, like you said, it's your opportunity to say the thing you want to say. Because if you don't tell your story, no one else is going to tell your story. And then they're just going to write around you. Also, to your point of, people Googling you, like your kids Googling you and forever and ever. I've hit upon this phrase recently with clients is public relations is writing your history.
Oh, that's
that
good.
5 years from now, a reporter is going to want to do an article about you or whatever, and they're going to Google, and what are they going to come up with? The stuff you say today is the stuff that's going to inform their questions later. So take advantage of this opportunity and say the stuff you want to tell the reporter, their audience, the world.
100%.
And do the research. Like you said, it goes way beyond the old, write the 3 things down you want to say.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, there really
Are
is.
there any landmines, universal landmines maybe for interviews? I mean, are there things you need to watch out for that sort of come up on a regular basis? We joked a little bit before about like the big pause and,
Yeah.
you're baiting people to fill the space, or are there any other kinds of things that people should, maybe bad habits
Yeah.
that people should get out
Hundreds.
of, or
There's
something
hundreds
like
of them. So I've wrapped this all up in a statement that I make, and a lot of people have problems with it, but I will stand by this till my dying day, that a media interview is not a conversation. I will absolutely stand by that. Now, there's an asterisk. It should sound like one, right? And I just referred to that. Like, how do I take this prepared stuff and deliver it as if it's spontaneous? The problem is, since we all were like 2 and 3 years old and learning how to speak, we are hardwired with what I call the habits of conversation. So after we're done here, I'm going down to Starbucks. I'm going to grab a coffee, my mid-afternoon caffeine hit, and I'm going to have a little chat with the barista, right? Or the way that I talk to my kids' teacher on parent-teacher night. We have these conversational cues and reflexes and habits that are built into us. That's where the awkward pause comes from, right? It's not a media trick. It's a human trick. It's a conversational hack. And so I ask people to understand that the thing you're going to get into, again, positive, negative, doesn't matter. Understand that this is something different. It looks like a conversation. If someone was sitting there looking at it, it looks just like one, but it isn't. And so a lot of the mistakes people make fall under that conversational bucket. So for example, like if you're on TV and you're doing an interview with the TV station, whether it's in person or on Zoom, a lot of times people, as they're listening to the question, will be nodding their head. And what we do as people, it's like, okay, I hear you. I get it. Like, you're signaling to the person that I understand what you're saying. And one of the problems, and it's specifically a TV problem, is that the person can be saying some really terrible stuff and you appear to be agreeing to it, right? So we know there's going to be a lot of people dying on the streets of San Francisco, and you're nodding, and you're the politician who's responsible for this, and it looks like you're agreeing. And so just a very simple thing, just don't nod your head. Or people will have these little poker tells, right? Where you'll ask someone a question, they answer it one way, they answer it in the affirmative, and you suspect they're lying, but then they start shaking their head, like their body is betraying them. So there's all these little things. People who
is the old up and to the left detective thing, like where were you on the night
they're
of?
making it up or they're recalling it. Yeah, the whole Chris Voss thing.
That's a good one, though.
Landmines. And just basic stuff, right? Like people who are moving around while they're doing their interview, TV interview, like you're bobbing around, or people fidgeting with their hands, arms crossed, all those sorts of things. People who will speculate. What do you think happened? We shouldn't be talking about anything in the future, but people, because, well, I'm being interviewed, they must think I'm kind of important, and I will probably start making some stuff up. What do you think the president thinks about this? What do you think the governor thinks about this? I'm using American terms to identify with your audience. And people, you have no right to, and there's no upside for you putting words in the mouth of someone else. You wouldn't want someone doing that for your company. It's amazing how quickly people will answer those questions. Well, I think the governor should think da 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 da, and suddenly now the governor's mansion is on the phone, right? And so there's ways to handle all those things, but you need to go in understanding that the reflexes of a conversation will betray you in a media interview. Now, you should still be engaging and helpful and courteous and knowledgeable. And after that interview, people should be thinking, oh my God, that was great. Like, he was really on today, or she was really on today. But it should all be figured out in advance. The bar that I hold myself to is, if I'm preparing for a media interview, by the time it's over, I shouldn't have had to make up anything new. I should have figured it out all ahead. And it's hard, right? You can get some really left field questions, but then you want to get back in your happy place. But to me, that it's all about that prep and practice, and importantly, understanding that it's not a conversation. It should sound like one, but it isn't.
And there's a big difference there in what you just said between intentionally making news, which in the business is, making the announcement you want to make, and accidentally fumbling into making news, which is saying the thing you didn't mean to say, and all of a sudden, like the nightmare thing, that's the headline.
Yeah. And then people will say retroactively, that thing I just said, that was off the record. And like, he can't, well, even off the record, right? It's very misunderstood. People think it's like
It's
this magical shield. And that's why we tell people.
And every reporter has a different definition, even of what off the record means to them.
Yeah.
You have to be really, really, that's why I counsel clients, never, ever talk to a reporter until you talk to me, you know, because like you said, we can be your bulletproof vest and we can help you through it. Is there an example that pops to mind? And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
The worst media interview you've ever seen?
Yeah. So it's a Canadian example. Sorry, folks. The worst group of media interviews I've seen, and you know, maybe it's a function of me getting older. I'm in my 50s, or maybe it's just being around this stuff more. To me, the worst group of media interviews that I've seen, and I actually feel empathy for this guy. Most people don't, but it was in July 6th, 2013, there was a train crash in Canada, in Quebec, the province of Quebec. There was a town called Lac-Mégantic. And this big, large train full of oil tankers was parked up on top of a hill. And somehow it wasn't braked or stopped properly. And throughout the night, somehow this train got loose and went downhill just with momentum, and it got into the town. And like I'm telling you, it looked like a war zone. All these cars blew up. 47 people were killed, and they were not just killed, they were vaporized. Like there was nothing left. The town was decimated. And it was the news story of the year in Canada. And the chair of the board of the railway, I think the railway is called MMA, like Maine, something in Atlantic, something Maine and Atlantic. And the guy's name is Ed Burkhart. He lives in the States. I've actually Googled his phone number because I want to call him up. I want to talk to this guy. But Google some of his media coverage when he shows. First of all, he showed up 4 days later. So in PR land, right? That's 4 days too late. But again, I have to give him some points for showing up. This is an older guy. He looks like he's in his 70s. Not an excuse, but he did an interview with everyone who had a camera. And his interviews were like, for example, the first question he was asked, which it's a great question if you're a journalist. And if it's a great question if you're a citizen. What do you have to say to the families of the victims, the 47 people your railway just killed? That's the first question he's asked. His actual answer, and we all know what the empathy, this is heartbreaking, devastating. We're going to do everything we can, cooperating with the authorities, investigation, His actual answer is, well, you have to keep in mind, I am a victim of this whole thing too. That's his actual answer. And so, and if you look at it through the right lens, he's right. He is a victim. He perhaps did nothing wrong. He was just this guy on this board, and he went through this career. Like I really believe this guy's a nice guy. He's a guy you could have a beer with. He, has probably a golden retriever. That's the dog I imagine him having. He gives the neighbor's kid $5 in a Christmas card or whatever. To me, this was an example of what I call the Clint Eastwood school of media training, right? Where someone might have even said to him, Ed, he's going, I'm going up to that town, which is tough, right? To just get in your car or your plane and go there is tough. I have no doubt someone said, do you want us to send our PR team? Do you want us to send the flack from the agency? Do you want to do a media training session? And I have no doubt that if that happened, he would have said something like, I don't need those goddamn weasels. I'm just going to go there. I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to try to help, right? What could go wrong? Well, of course, as you know, and he did interview after interview after interview, no apology, didn't talk about the victims, didn't talk about the families, speculating. I think the engineer did something wrong, getting in arguments with the journalists, telling them how to do their jobs. I really believe that this was fight or flight taking over this guy's actions. Again, I'm not excusing him because I think a 1 hour media training talk would have helped. Now, what's funny is, so I'll say that he was far and away the worst series of media interviews I've ever seen. And because he did so many of them, he did them for 6 months, and I'm the victim. And so he became this hated man. So, and I've used this example hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So pandemic hits, March of 2020, I lose all my business all at once. So I'm sitting around, I'm watching Tiger King, and I created that media training course and ate too many chips and stuff like that. But one of the funny things that I did, because you just don't have time for this stuff, I went and I Googled all of his media coverage, because I felt, and this is going to sound corny, but I felt like I owed this guy a debt of gratitude. I've used him as my poster boy for terrible media interviews. And so,
Right.
Jody, I'll tell you this. I found way in the depths of YouTube, I found his first interview when he got to town, and it was excellent. It was excellent. It looked like he had just arrived and the reporters swarmed around him, and he said everything right. I'm heartbroken. I'm devastated. I haven't slept in days. Our whole team is beside themselves. We are going to do everything we can. It doesn't matter what it costs. We're going to support the community. I'm meeting with the mayor. Like, it was textbook. It was great. The problem, and again, this goes back to conversational habits, and I'm guessing here because I don't know this guy. Many people, a conversational habit is like, for example, if I'm talking to you and I mentioned something like I said earlier, I think I have a sister who's a reporter at a national newspaper, right? Now, for the rest of our conversation, I'm not going to tell you that again, because I think we all have this little ledger in our minds where if I tell you an anecdote, I don't want to be, the kind of Joe Biden character who tells, not to make fun of your president, but just, I don't want to be the person who repeats the story,
ahead.
right? And so we all have
equal opportunity offenders on this show.
But like we see that with older folks, right? They tell you the same story twice in one phone call or one interaction. And it's weird, and no one wants to be that person. And so how that manifests itself in a media interview, you might have 3 or 4 points and you go through them all and you cross them off with a Sharpie and you think, okay, I've done my job. But then the reporter keeps asking you questions for 11 or 12 or 14 or 24 or more minutes. And now you're just making stuff up. In your head, you think, well, they're going to know that the first 4 things I said were the good things. And this other stuff is just content. And so I really believe he felt like he had done his job. He ticked the box. I got to town. I said all the stuff. And then he just
started. They all heard it. So I don't have to say it again.
And then the subsequent interviews were so bad that it just kicked the other one into the dustbin of history. So, who knows if I'm accurate with that? These are my observations. But to me, that was the worst string of interviews that I've ever seen. And I don't think it was out of malice. I think it was out of panic and just ignorance of the process.
Wow. That great story. And I had not previously seen that specific interview. It calls to mind the Tony Hayward interview from BP.
I just want my life back.
I want my life back thing. Like, and for those of you who are not familiar, Google, BP oil, Gulf oil spill, Tony Hayward, you'll come up with the interview.
But I will say again, before he said that, his interview was perfect.
He did everything right. Exactly.
And then he said that thing, and then the other part just gets deleted. And all we take away is that one line. That line will haunt him forever.
And that's the nightmare reference that you made earlier in the show. It's like you go off script for that 1 minute. So I guess a big part of media training too is teaching discipline.
I guess it's discipline, right? Like part of it's focus. Like many people, again, the smarter the people are and the busier they are, the harder this is because they have so many things racing through their mind. And so part of the problem is the reporter's asking you a question, but you have 9 things going on in your brain. You have to have one thing going on. You have to listen to the reporter, be locked in and hear every single word that they're saying. And then give yourself a couple seconds. Like, it's not Jeopardy. You're not people, you can't see me, but I'm like buzzing in. You don't have to answer in a nanosecond. Take a couple seconds, take 2 seconds, 3 seconds. You can do a lot of thinking. And a lot of people will they'll regurgitate that thing the reporter said to buy themselves some time. And so they think that they're doing themselves a favor. And a lot of times people don't even realize they're saying it. And so there are many, many, many ways to do this. And the problem is the reporter is not just going to do it once. They're likely to do it 3 or 4 or 6 times during the course of an interview. You might be able to avoid 6 of them. It's the 7th one. If you repeat it, it ends up in the story. And I don't blame reporters. It's a great way to ask questions. Now, some people do it on purpose, like any profession. Bakers, candlestick makers, if that's a thing still. Journalists, there's some bad journalists. There's some people who have complete biases. They shouldn't be in the business. But I think on the whole, 90% of them are just trying to tell stories, just trying to get it right. There's not many professions where your name goes on the story and is attached to it as part of your personal resume. I don't think they're sitting there like Mr. Burns, trying to oh, how can I screw this person up? We do it ourselves. It's self-inflicted wounds. And then because it's easier and it's human nature, we blame the reporter afterwards.
Yeah, very good point. Very good points. This has been a fantastic conversation, Warren. I know we could go for, at least another 9 days.
Oh, for sure.
You and I on this. But we are going to segue now into the rapid fire portion, question portion of our podcast. If you've heard it before, this is where we steal a page from inside the Anchor studio, ask our guests a couple of rapid fire questions. I'm really looking forward to your answers. So let's just hit it. And we'll throw the Canadian disclaimer over this just in case.
Okay.
Rapid fire question.
Yeah.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
In case I don't know anything about the States. Yes. But I think
There
I
you
should.
go. Well,
Let it rip.
we have listeners all over, so let's go for it. Rapid fire question number one: what is your favorite news source?
My favorite news source is Twitter. I actually use Twitter to find which stories I like, and I'll just drill into those because I found that it used to be the Globe and Mail, the paper that my sister works for, but I just, I don't really like one specific lens. And so I follow, like, my Twitter feed is primarily PR people and journalists and, guitars lately. Twitter is my favorite source for that.
All right, then rapid fire question number two: what is your favorite social media platform?
LinkedIn right now. I think most of the business I have today has been built on LinkedIn. I had 2 posts about that Rogers outage. I talked to the telecommunications outage that last week, in the last 7 days, have garnered almost 500,000 impressions, which for me is like, to get 50 on one was usually pretty good. So that's been bananas. But LinkedIn to me has been the most valuable and where I find the most camaraderie, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of where the adults hang out.
Usually,
most of the time.
Yeah.
Rapid fire question number three: coffee or alcohol?
I can't really choose between those. I love coffee. I referenced it already. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to grab one. And I'm also a huge fan of single malt whiskey. So, and I have 1 beer a day, which is that's my little nice and cold, nice beer. So I don't know if if I had to pick one of them. To be honest, I'm probably picking alcohol.
Good for you. All right. Rapid fire question number 4: what's your favorite on the run food?
On the run food. So your audience is not going to get this at all, well, unless the Canadian folks. A&W Burgers. A&W is a fast food franchise. Do you have that? You don't have that in the States, do you?
I don't believe we have it. No, but go ahead.
It's
plenty of burger franchises.
So we don't have like In-N-Out and Shake Shack and stuff like that. We don't have like the cool. I think there's a couple Five Guys around, but not near me. So A&W, if I'm on the run doing media training, and I know this is terrible, but you finish a session, you're stressed, it's like you're tired, and you just want something to just shove in there. And A&W has, what I love about it is the burger looks like the picture does on the commercial. Because I'll go to McDonald's or whatever, and I'll get something. It looks like someone had it under their armpit, just squeezing it out. Like, what the hell is this? And so I think part of it is like 50% of it is just, it looks great.
Excellent. All right. We will check it out the next time we're up your way. And the last one, rapid fire question number 5: what do you want to be after you finish this career?
Alive would be good. I'll start with that. I think my career, I see in 3 phases. The first 15 years or so would be mostly writing. I was trying to be media training, but nobody wanted me. So I reinvented myself as a writer. That's how I built my business. The middle 15, 20 years I see as what I'm doing now, media training. And the last piece, probably because I'm just going to be becoming feeble over the years, I think digital courses, books, content, podcasts, stuff like that. Even if it's not a huge revenue driver, I think just the scalability. So I think that's what I'd like to be. Other than that, yeah, alive would be great. Keeping the bar low.
I'll join you on that one.
Please do.
I'll meet you. I'll meet you at the A&W.
There we go. I'll buy it. There we go.
Sounds good. Well, Warren, this has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you and your business online.
Weeksmedia.ca is my website, and it's not very exciting unless you enjoy the world of media training. I go deep on this one topic, and I'm not very conversant in most other things, but on that, as I mentioned, I could talk for days. On Twitter, I'm at Warren_Weeks. And the story about that is I saw this article about Twitter in 2006. I went and I got my name at Warren Weeks. I got on Twitter. I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Like, at Warren is having a coffee. Like, this is bullshit. So I deleted it. And then some guy from the States stole my name, and he never uses it. So, and we follow each other on LinkedIn. But so now I have the underscore, and that's the fact that I thought Twitter was stupid for about a year.
That's a great story. I was only able to get my complete name on Twitter. Everywhere else, I'm some variation of Jody Fisher. But yeah, if you Google it, if you search it, it comes up naturally enough. So I just say that I'm Jody Fisher. Well, thanks again, Warren. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you dropping all this knowledge and sharing this with us. And like I said, we could go for days, so we'll probably have you back at some point.
Thanks so much, Jody. And hey, if you want to be on my podcast, I know everybody does this, but I have a conversation style show and love having communicators on there. So if you want to be on, let me know. I'll send you the deets and we can hook that up too.
Sign me up. Absolutely. We'll do it for sure. Thank you everyone for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Appold. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online, like I said, at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.